Good morning, folks. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy day to spend with us to talk about Teams Phone delegation. My name is Matt Sims. I'm based in Milwaukee, and I am joined by Jeff Bart. We're both customer success managers who are focused around converged communications, and so we spend a lot of our time, most of our work times, working with enterprise customers who are on the Teams Phone deployment journey. And so what we hope to do is first provide an overview of the delegation experience within Teams. And specifically today, like we're talking about calling delegation. Well, there is meeting delegation, but that is configured independently from what we're discussing today. We're going to try to frame things within the context of the business value, and we're going to provide a link to a helpful resource around finding the business value specific for your organization as you do your business justification, your cost justification for Teams. We'll talk about some of the relevant personas, again, within the context of personas that we typically see with Teams Phone, but we're going to focus on the ones where delegation is most relevant. And then we'll get into, we're not going to do a live demo because we just have a few minutes with you folks, but we will show you the experience of delegation, both from and I would say most importantly, from the perspective of the end user, and then also from the perspective of the IT administrator. We'll talk about a couple use cases, time permitting, and then we'll also do our best to cover Q&A. So with that said, because time is of the essence, we'll keep rolling here. Okay, so let's start with the business value. I always like to start here just to kind of like put in context what we're talking about here. So the business value of any solution, but in particular Microsoft Teams Phone, we need to, a lot of times your job in your organizations is to help either construct the business case or help articulate the business case to stakeholders within your organization around why are we making this move to Teams Phone. So we're getting very specific today around delegation, but there is one, I just do want to frame the conversation today in terms of that. So we have a public resource that we're going to make you folks aware of if you're not already aware of it. It's called the Total Economic Impact of Microsoft Teams Phone. It was commissioned by Microsoft, but it's done by a third party, done by Forrester, the industry analyst folks, and it does just help with categorizing where the cost savings and the productivity enhancements that organizations typically see with Teams Phone, where they can realize those. So again, just really high level collaboration productivity obviously goes up with a solution like Teams Phone, which is born in the cloud, is flexible, integrated with Microsoft 365. And then I would say most significantly, and what resonates most with stakeholders is the hard cost savings. So lower total cost of ownership, specifically in the area of hardware, those maintenance and support agreements, those like really expensive traditional PBX maintenance agreements go away, licensing, consolidated usage deployment, because a lot of times you're doing least cost routing, or you're doing more voice over IP calls versus PSTN calls where there are usage charges. And then finally, IT management burden. And as we talk today, IT management burden is where the business value for delegation comes into play. We'll show this, but one of the neat things with delegation is we provide a self-service model where end users can configure and support their own delegation.
And that's critical since it doesn't require IT administration to become involved. Doesn't require a ticket to set up a delegate. Doesn't require folks with administrator level access to do that. So I think that's what we're hopefully going to be able to build on, is how the feature set that we're going to talk about and how it plays into this the red arrow there that shows your ownership costs going down on IT management burdens.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. So again, another slide on the business value, getting a little bit more specific to delegation. What we see is that the boss admin, the executive, and the executive admin, these are really influential users. They have critical telephony needs, and like their impact is very large in any sort of a deployment or migration to Teams Phone. And I'm sure I'm not telling you anything new, but it just, it bears repeating that in particular, the exec admins, for anyone who's been involved in a technology project, you've got to get the executive admins on your side. They're such a critical audience in the success of any sort of technology migration project.
And they can help propagate the story a bit too, right? So to your point about having them on your side, they're connected in so many other areas of the organization, not only directly to leaders. Hey, I'm having a good experience. Hey, I like my new features. Hey, everything's working great. But they're just so broadly connected through most organizations that they can also help educate others, teach others the capabilities that are out there, and kind of support that, as opposed to becoming, kind of blockers to your deployment or adoption activity. So,
yeah, great points, Jeff. So as we mentioned a couple minutes ago, we're going to focus on how delegation, you can provide a self-service model where end users can manage their own delegation settings. And then we also have the ability to do things in the more traditional way, where as an IT administrator, you can configure the delegation settings. One point that we're going to try to hit on is that, we have different client experiences. We have the desktop experience, we've got the mobile experience, and then also for the web and for the Teams Phone, the physical Teams Phone devices. What you'll see though is that the settings, because it's a cloud service, the settings synchronize across the various client experiences. So you just configure delegation once, and then it propagates to all the various client experiences.
In those last two bullets there are simple. It pretty much built into the definition of delegation, but it's important maybe for your organization to understand too, if there are critical call flows that can't go missed call or aren't as effective if they're sent to a voicemail. We want to make sure that the feature enables less missed calls, more customer interaction, end user interaction, or even product and service and support interactions and so forth. And then the opposite of that is placing calls on behalf of, right? So if you want to be able to place a call on behalf of a leader or a boss, I think it's important for us to kind of think about, while this feature has often even been called the boss admin feature or delegated call feature, right? It's not limited to just those work groups. And so those can be, the feature can be incorporated into other use cases. There are HR use cases where this is, kind of a critical feature, not really designed to replace the functionality of like a full-blown call queue or even, some of the auto attendant type capabilities. But if you have, 2 or 3 people that work in an organization and you want to be able to make sure that inbound calls aren't missed, right? It doesn't have to be applied to just leaders and their administrative support. It can be used out in functional areas of the business too. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's why
we get into personas too. Sorry.
Yeah, totally. I mean, a lot of times we focus on delegation, and I know when I think about it, a lot of times I'm focusing on the inbound calls, making sure that we're handling the inbound calls. But to your point, there's additional value on being able to place calls on behalf of an executive and having that caller ID identity match the executive who you're making the calls on the behalf of. Okay, so when we think about any Teams Phone deployment project or the Teams Phone journey, and it's not specific to Teams Phone, but we think about certain telephony end user personas and the requirements of those. And so we tend to think of roles like a receptionist having a particular set of requirements and required capabilities, back office or information worker. And this is kind of, I would say, really our bread and butter with Teams Phone. And we typically see lots and lots of focus here around the information worker, but maybe a little bit less focus around these two personas that we have highlighted. So the first is the exec and the second is the executive admin. So the challenges for these folks are, on the executive, they're typically faced with lots of interruptions. They need to stay connected around all their devices. They're clearly influential folks in an organization, and they need to be, so their time is really, really valuable, and any communications to and from those individuals are, they're very, very important. So here's where the executive administrator comes into play. And for both these personas, the important features, in addition to basic calling and user managed settings like call forwarding and simultaneous ring, they rely on delegation, on the calling delegation feature set. We're, in terms of the devices that these folks typically are using, and again, we'll show the experiences for each of these client experiences, but a lot of times there is a PC or a headset involved. And one thing I see with executives is sometimes there's still this reliance on the physical desk phone. But we also have the PC with headset and the mobile app. And I would say increasingly the mobile app is important. Likewise, those same client experiences for the executive admin. Now, just one note before we move forward, this persona mapping exercise we think is really an important piece to any Teams Phone journey, and we have some resources that we'll put in the CommUnity Microsoft team that we can share with you folks to help frame your telephony user personas as you're going through the Teams Phone journey. You can either work with your customer success manager, or if you're independently going through that exercise, it's helpful to have a framework like this to work from. Okay, I think now we're gonna switch gears a little bit and start just walking through the experiences. And so, Jeff, it's all yours to start walking through the experiences, and I'll chime in when I have insights.
No, appreciate that. Thanks for all the background there. I did grab control. Sorry, without giving you a quick heads up. Hopefully everybody can kind of see on the slides that we have here, right? So we're going to start with our traditional, what are the settings and how folks can interact with the settings. Again, as Matt pointed out earlier, this is from an end user perspective. So an end user can apply and or nominate a person within their organization to set the delegate settings within, we start up here in the little new Teams client, getting to the point where you select your settings down to calls, and then you can, define not only who is the delegate, but what we want the delegate features to be. And so if you look down here, we have the settings where we can make calls, receive calls. This is where the person who wants someone on their behalf to be able to interact with the phone services, to either make those calls, receive those calls, they have the ability to check the control that they're going to allow their delegate to have on their behalf, right? So if they have make calls, we'll show you in a second what the user experience is when you're a delegate and you want to make a call on somebody's behalf, and what the experience is when you want to receive calls. But it's also important to note, because this is a little bit of a recent feature update, we added a few more settings in this control set to be able to either prevent the delegate from changing the settings, or the opportunity to pick up calls that are on hold or even join active calls. So I think those were 3 new checkboxes, or maybe 2 new checkboxes about 2-3 months back. But this is the traditional setup, if you will, for what an end user can do without IT interaction to be able to define the delegates. And I think the important part, we have some links at the end of the deck. If you want to be able to educate your organization to eliminate those calls that are traditionally coming into your IT or phone support organization, educate end users on how they can take control of these settings and features themselves. And there's a couple snackable videos we'll talk about built right into Teams that give you kind of how to go through these settings on your own without having to rely on a technical support team. Let me just jump to the next. So in the call experience, you'll notice a couple things on the left-hand side. We're identifying here how a user can see this area. The first, you'll see it's underlined as the personal, but because Patty here in this diagram is denoted as a delegate, she has the ability to see her own calls and then transition to Patty calls. And if you notice, also the drop down below the dial pad is where you get the capability to place that call either as yourself noted here or as someone else that is your delegate. For the inbound call experience itself, you can see that this is a call for the person who delegated that responsibility. And in the settings, as we covered before, there's the opportunity to set a differentiated ringtone. So I want my calls to ring in as one call. I want my delegated calls to ring in with a different ringtone. So those are a couple of the, I guess I would say, the best practices and notification differences that you can get. So you can tell the difference between a call that's destined for you versus a call that's destined for the person you delegated to, or is delegated to you, sorry. A lot of different visuals on this. You guys can kind of consume this as we provide the content later on or in the video. But if you notice, you have all the same settings that were capable, or at least most of the same settings that were capable inside the Teams client, also available on mobile. And then the same scenarios for the call experience itself. So you can see the same tab. You have the opportunity to place a call on behalf of, and you'll get the notification on a mobile device that gives you the differentiated notification that says, hey, this call is coming in for someone who delegated to you. But it's also, again, important in the settings on mobile as they're synced across our cloud scenarios and Teams, you're able to make those changes. So I think it's important for especially admins, right, who maybe need to be able to answer a call. They're out of the office, or maybe they've gone home for the day and the boss is still accepting calls. They have the ability to work and manage those controls from their mobile device. If they're not in front of their PC, maybe they're at home on the couch and have their mobile phone with them and so forth. So,
yeah, absolutely. And one thing that you had called out on an earlier slide, and I just wanted to make mention of it, is that making use of those notification settings and specifically like quiet hours is a nice way to make sure that if although the settings, you get the flexibility of settings working across your devices and including your mobile, you can make sure that you're not your free time is not, you're not interrupted with dings and beeps on your mobile device.
Super good point. Sometimes you don't want to get any calls, let alone delegated calls.
Yes, exactly.
Important to call out here too, just as Matt mentioned earlier, this is just a visual of a physical phone, right? So the Teams physical phones that are out there running Teams native client, right, used to have the same capabilities, whether you're in the Teams app, whether you're on the web, whether you're on mobile or on a physical phone. You can control the settings. There's those 5 check boxes, and on the physical phone, it's noted as a toggle or a pill, as we like to call it. But those capabilities exist on the physical Teams devices themselves. And then I guess most importantly, we'll jump into, the fact that while users can do this and not have to open up a ticket or not depend on IT support, right, you do have administrative controls in the Teams Admin Center. If, as an administrator, you do need to modify or make modifications or set up delegation for a user, a lot to cover kind of here that you'll be able to kind of figure out on your own a little bit. But as you go into the Teams Admin Center, under each user's settings, right now we're under Patty settings. There is a section for call control where we set, I want calls to also ring my delegates. It's important because even with a delegate set, if you don't have the setting to say also ring my delegate, right? You can have a delegate set up and not ring the delegate, but you could set it to ring the delegate, and that's usually where you want it. By default, once the delegate's created, it might be turned off. You want to make sure that that's toggled on, but you can see the capabilities here that are enabled. And this is the administrative piece. And then for all my PowerShell family users out there that love to use PowerShell for administrative controls, there is a set CS user calling delegate capability and some syntax. We won't dive deep into that today, obviously, but the link is provided here on the slides. You can get to it. And I made mention of this just because I actually had a customer at one point that the delegation settings were pretty important, and they wanted to ensure that those settings were enforced on a nightly basis across multiple users or across multiple boss admins. In this case, it wasn't just administrative contacts, but it was important to be able to have like administrative support for the organization. They decided to create a PowerShell script, run it in an Azure runbook so that every night those delegation settings would go back to whatever it was to keep it consistent on a day-to-day basis. So it's just an added tip there on the PowerShell piece, but it's not required. You've got the end user control, you've got the admin control in Teams Admin Center, PowerShell for those in more advanced use cases.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jeff.
This quick slide here, just wanted to point out, as we talked about, right, it's one thing to be able to say the features and capabilities are end user capable, but how do you make sure end users are aware of what's going on? One of the easiest places to go is right in the Teams app. For old client users, in the lower left-hand corner in the Teams app, click on the question mark help button there. Like to more speak to the new client users, because hopefully most of you are on your journey to using the new Teams client. But upper right-hand corner, click on the help menu. If you type in the word delegation, there's a whole, crooked line. There's a whole string of quick snackable videos, how to share a line, how to set up a delegate, how to define the capabilities of the delegate. You don't even have to leave the Teams app. The help and how to set this up is right inside the Teams app. And so for those end users, for folks you want to make a campaign to make sure your end users, or at least those delegates, the admin support roles that are out there that are super influential, make sure they know how to do it. It's right there in the Teams app, so they can go into the help menu and watch those quick videos that are showing them how to do it right in front of them. And now we're in the Q&A if there is any.
Yeah, the chat's been pretty quiet. So if there's any questions, this would be the time. Speak up.
Yeah, we do have a couple.
Oh, we do. Good.
Yeah. One happens to be from one of our colleagues, guys.
Oh.
I'm going to go. Let's jump to Tim's question first, because we'll talk about Scott's later. I think the limit last time I checked was 25. I don't know if anybody remembers that. It was a 25, either delegate or delegee, right? It's hard to use the two versions of that word, but 25 I think is the limit.
Yeah, that's my recollection as well.
Yeah.
Good question, Tim.
Let's see here.
Gary has a good question. Are any links for deep dives into delegation? From my 2 cents, I think the best content is on learn.microsoft.com, and we can certainly forward some links to you, just kind of the official reference documentation. But and then also that has all the commandlet references for the PowerShell as well. The nice thing is what we've gone through today, there's nothing beyond that in terms of like a deeper dive. It's really pretty straightforward in terms of the setup and administration of things.
Yeah, and to Gary's question, if there's anything, maybe if you could help us understand what deep dive information might be valuable. I guess I'm trying to correlate maybe what you're looking for on the deep dive. Are you looking for more specific call flow details, or what the capabilities are out there? If we can't get to it in the next 3 minutes, we can absolutely see if we can follow up with Rituja provided some links there, but if there's more detail you need, let us know.
So next question I see is there an option to delegate only PSTN calls and exclude Teams to Teams calls. From my, Jeff, keep me honest. My understanding is we provide the ability to differentiate on inbound calls. We can differentiate and handle a call differently when it's coming from the PSTN versus a Teams to Teams call, and that's generally to do. It's generally for executives, and that's to mitigate some of the spam calling and things of that nature. So you could route calls from the PSTN directly to voicemail, for example. But I'm not aware of a way to do that just for delegated calls. Jeff, do you know?
No, I was going to say it's a separate feature set, right? So you can do different inbound treatments now. Recently announced for an inbound PSTN to say go directly to voicemail. We know a lot of organizations wanted that feature. They don't want to be bothered with spam and inbound PSTN calls, but want the internal tenant calls. It's not a function of call delegation in any way. It's a function of inbound call treatment. But delegation does apply to inbound within tenant calls and PSTN calls. So there's not really a separation. But if you are interested, I think if one of my peers can't get to it, we'll stick it in chat, the link to how to configure the inbound call treatment for PSTN calls.
Oh, this is a good one from Gary. What have your customers found as being the easiest client experience for executive admins to use?
I think what I found is the straight up Teams client itself or web, right? They look the same. It gives you the most screen space to interact with. Therefore, they can kind of see things like chat. You know, for instance, a delegate takes a call, right? Here's a great use case. Admin assistant takes a call, needs to message their boss, right? Hey, you have a call from so-and-so, right? So the full blown client or web client gives them the most screen space to be able to take the call, put it on hold, instantiate a chat to their boss and say, hey, do you want to take a call from Bob Jones? That can be done on mobile, but there's a little less screen space to work with there. And you can take the call on the physical client itself, but then you still have a physical hard phone, but then you still have to pivot back to the client to initiate that chat to kind of do that consult piece. So I think we're seeing that, you know, admins are using the Teams client most. But, you know, a lot of folks still like to have that physical phone to be able to, you know, grab a handset and answer it and have a hard mute button so they're not, you know, having to deal with the confusion on their screen.
Yeah, I think you summarized it really well, Jeff. I agree. I think sometimes there's a little bit of a training jump to get folks comfortable who've been used to relying on the physical phone, but I think the juice is worth the squeeze and the experience ends up being better end to end with the Teams soft client, the desktop client.
Richard's question, I don't know that I've ever seen an organization attempt to prevent the use of delegation. There's not. It's really more of a helpful feature than it is, you know, any risk on security side or anything like that. So I have not run across an organization that has locked it down to a feature set for specific personas or, you know, really any other components of their organization. Right? It's usually, you know, once it's educated on and how it works. I've seen almost every organization take advantage of it and not limit it to any pieces of there. I don't know if you've seen anything different, Matt.
No, same. I haven't seen folks lock it down. I think it's just not relevant for certain personas, like my persona as an information worker. It's probably not. It's just not. I'm not influential enough in the organization, or I'm not busy enough to need to have someone help triage my calls, but
I have Matt as
but
my delegate. He answers all my calls.
Yeah, exactly. But cool. I think we're about at time.